I'm delighted to introduce the second Satellite Symposium session. It's entitled Confessions of a Successful Startup in Aerospace, Energy and Medicine. It's moderated by David Horsap as part of the OGCI Climate Investments. Now, these guys are out there doing it, okay? And to some extent, they've done it already. So this is some really invaluable knowledge if you're in the startup ecosystem. So ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for David Horsap and his guests.
Excellent. Well, welcome, gentlemen. Welcome, everybody. And as Stuart has said, it's fantastic to be back in person. I've been involved with pumps and pipes for a number of years. I think going back about 8 or 9 years, I think, is when I first started working with pumps and pipes. And it's sort of my... it's my version of church. It's my innovation church. This is where I get my passion, inspiration, and a lot of my connections from. It's where we build our networks or our net worth, as was said earlier today on the panel. So really excited to moderate this panel today. I've been involved in pumps and pipes before, but previously I wore a different hat. Previously, my first 29 years of my career was in the oilfield service industry, working for one of the major service companies, and made the switch earlier this year in January into climate technology, into climate investments with OGCI climate investments, really focusing on decarbonization technologies to mitigate climate change. Before I jump in, I would like to thank Stuart and also Ariel. These events take an awful lot to pull together, and I think everybody can see it's been another fantastic event this year. I'd like to briefly just introduce my panel here, and then we'll hand the mic over to them to say a little bit about their individual businesses, about their individual technologies. So Peter, welcome.
Thank you.
Great to have you. Peter is with Kelvin. And if you haven't had a chance to chat with Peter, Kelvin has a phenomenal AI ML platform for optimizing industrial processes, really cutting edge technology. We have Angel Esparza. Angel's with GHG Sat, and GHG Sat is a company that is an aerospace company that puts satellites into space to measure methane emissions, predominantly methane emissions from large sources on Earth. And incredibly exciting technology, being able to truly quantify with great precision and sensitivity emissions coming from both industrial and natural sources. And Zafar, nice to have you on the panel too with Ceranos. And Ceranos has a very novel medical device that actually has an early warning signal for internal bleeding. So fantastic panel representing the 3 pillars of pumps and pipes in innovation, in a wonderful innovation establishment like the ION. So I tell you what, let's kick off with our first piece here, and maybe start with you, Peter. Do you want to tell us just a little bit about Kelvin and how Kelvin, what the technology is, how the company started?
Sure. So again, thank you for the time today. So I'm the founder and CEO of Kelvin, and we are a collaborative control software company. What does that mean? Well, it's the idea of bringing people together to make better decisions and to be able to get actually the best information possible so that you're layering human expertise along with artificial intelligence. And when you do that, you can actually get really remarkable outcomes and improvements. So we focus on our customers who are in the energy space and the industrial space who are trying to both blend a desire to maintain, if not increase production, but also recognizing that there's some very significant sustainability initiatives which are now important, and sort of with my colleague to the left, an understanding that there's an opportunity to take the insights that a GHG sat will discover through the imagery and otherwise that they see, but also be able to find out maybe what led to that problem, finding that issue. And so our focus is really to find and fix problems, because if we do that, then we can improve operations.
Excellent, thank you, Peter. Angel, tell us a little bit about GHG Sat.
Good afternoon, yes. So, well, thank you for that introduction, Peter, here. I guess one of the things exactly what we do is to precisely use satellites. This is a very interesting part because, I mean, we have been around and understanding how satellites work and have a preconceived notion on how the technology. So, but what we have done here is to kind of work into basically tailoring this sensor particularly to detect methane. And so that posed a very interesting opportunity, not only as a business, but also to understand how emissions are not only in the United States, where we will have a better platform of things, but around the world. And that's right now, with the COP26, 27, it becomes kind of the norm in some of the things. So that's one of the exciting things that this company has been basically, that's the main endeavor right now. I'm a technical, principal technical and advisor to the company at this sense. But we all have been provided with some of this insight of what was the origin and understanding of the company, and we can definitely talk about that later on. But that's exactly what we do. We detect methane emissions from sources, for individual sources around the world. Thank you.
Thanks, Angel. And Zafar, representing the medical industry. Tell us a little bit about Suranos.
Sure. Again, thanks everyone for attending this afternoon session, and appreciate the introduction. I'm with Suranos. We're an early stage commercial medical device company, and what we are aiming to do is to reduce bleeding complications during endovascular access procedures. So, as technologies have advanced and there's minimally invasive ways of doing some of these procedures, either whether it's to your brain or to your heart to fix aneurysms or to incorporate stenting and heart valves, they have to go through a vessel, primarily the femoral artery. And in those procedures, there's a risk of bleeding. And what we're trying to serve as is basically be like the canary in the coal mine by identifying these bleeds very early. Currently, at this point, in some of these procedures, bleeding rates could occur at almost rates of about 20%, and maybe cost the system about $20,000 per incremental incident. And what our device is able to do is use bioimpedance to be able to see a change in impedance along the access site, which our device is inserted into, and provides early warning. So, less than 20 cc's of blood loss prior to the bleed actually becoming a complication. So our device was born out of here at the Texas Heart Institute. We've actually funded and raised money out of angel investors in the Houston community, and really built out the company in this unique ecosystem. We're now commercial, have FDA approval, and have launched nationwide our current device.
That's great. And I'd say you do have a booth here today, so directly behind here, you can actually see the device, I believe, at your booth.
Yes.
So, excellent. It's interesting, having spent my whole career in innovation, I'm always intrigued to see where that first kernel of idea came from, which ultimately became a successful product, became a successful company. So maybe Angel, tell us a little bit about GHGSat and maybe where the idea came from, how the company started up.
Yes, absolutely. So this is very interesting in the sense that it's very key to have this vision. So what happened here, the founder and CEO essentially, back in 2006, things started in the sense with what happened with, following what happened with the Kyoto Protocol, understanding what the carbon capture or at least the carbon credit type of scheme. And so that's when the vision started. But it started basically into 2008 when essentially the CEO now at the company say, okay, we have this idea. So how can people say, it's easy for you to say that you're capturing or detecting something, but how can you prove that? How can you measure that? Can we be the ruler of the world? And meaning not the ruler as managing people, but being the actual metric of the world. So that's how the idea started. Now, back in the day, it was basically CO2, and it still is very relevant. But as you can see, now kind of the pivotal or kind of the main thing has shifted, or the idea has shifted into what we have in terms of methane. And so one of the things that the company basically started with this idea in 2011 and thinking about what can we do with CO2, measuring CO2, but also have the idea, can we use the same sensor to measure methane at the same time, right? So that's how basically the company started, with this idea on the regulatory scheme, or at least on the public policy, things that can be useful for the world, and this vision that the leaders at the time had, and say, okay, in the Kyoto Protocol, we're going to be signatories and all of this. So keep in mind that the US was not a signatory, so therefore California decided to do their own signatory as an independent. So that was kind of the culprit on that idea. Basically, that carbon credit market, and see, okay, so how can we pivot from that and start coming with a product that helps us to measure things like that?
That's interesting. How about on the medical side, Zafar? Tell us a little bit about how you started, and maybe some of the missteps or things you would do differently. Maybe share some insights for other startups that may be here in the audience today.
Yeah, so just to the first part of the question, yeah, our device was actually invented by an electrophysiologist here at Texas Heart Institute. He had a patient that actually passed away from an internal bleed, wondering if there's a better way to do it, and he devised that way with our particular device, with the Early Bird. So it was born out of a solution to a problem that interventionists like he has to face every day. Kind of thinking about through our kind of startup phase and some of the missteps, there's a lot of things that you can kind of think about when hindsight is 20/20 on how you can do things better. But I think one of the things that I think is pertinent for any person that is taking on this endeavor is to be able to balance, especially when you're taking other people's money to invest and achieving milestones, to run fast but also fail fast. So the way I look at it is some of the ways that we could have mitigated and probably preserved capital, because I think that's the sensitivity that all of us have when we're running startups, is capital preservation and using it efficiently. And it's a hard balance to have when you think that there's milestones that you need to achieve. And for us, it's developing a medical device with limited resources, and sometimes the partners you take can make a big impact on how you proceed to your milestone. I think in hindsight, my experience has been, when you know that you're trying to work things out while still trying to move fast, it may not always be the right decision in the long run. Cut the cord, readjust, and even if you have to extend the timeline, it can actually be a boon for you later on, especially when you talk about capital preservation. I mean, capital is like the manna to startups, and if anything, that's the piece of advice I would give to folks.
That's helpful. And maybe Peter, turning to you, tell us a little bit about maybe how Kelvin morphed into what it is today, because typically, I'm sure this wasn't what you originally intended.
Not at all.
Tell us a little bit about the journey that you've been on and some of the customer insights that you've learned over the time.
So believe it or not, the first application we built was a competitive dance application. True story, Jounce. And the reason was, we had this insight that actually we saw this massive proliferation of the number of iPhones and Android devices that were driven by a whole host of new sensors, so magnometers, gyroscopes, and otherwise. And we realized if you could actually analyze those patterns around those movements and identify an event attached to it, you could derive some insight. And I was actually a recovering healthcare IT and technology investor, and so I was like, I don't want to do healthcare. Where can I get a lot of data really quickly? And I'm like, let's build an app, and let's see if we can identify if somebody's twerking or if they're doing, the samba or otherwise, and we actually could. But we also realized, we've proven an underlying hypothesis that we can do very, very sophisticated rapid pattern matching, but I don't want to go after a consumer application. I want to do something else, something that I believe is going to be more impactful. And so what we realized was we could attach those same, in this case, Android devices to beam pumps. And the reason we went there is that one of my buddies was like, hey, I've seen guys in the field go out and put their hands on beam pumps, feel the different movement patterns, the vibrations. There's a real art to that, but there's a science. This individual is actually developing a knowledge of patterns and associating it with events. Do you think you could do the same? We said, let's try it. So we ended up going out with plastic boxes and around Android devices and zip tying them to a bunch of pump jacks. And what do you know? We started to find stuff. And those patterns were the things that you would experience if you were on site with those particular machines. But if you weren't there, you were missing them. And so this idea that you could actually capture more information, and we are Kelvin because Lord Kelvin used to say, to measure is to know, right? And it's our belief that if you can actually measure these things, if you can find these patterns, you can actually make better decisions. And so one of my business school professors is like, I can't wait for this case study because it's going to be really fun to write about going from competitive dance applications to the oil field.
Dancing beam pumps.
Dancing beam pumps, yeah.
Love it. And Hel, anything? Did you start out wanting to be a satellite company and measuring methane emissions?
Well, that's a good point. So what happened is that the company, like I mentioned to you, it was kind of destined to look at this CO2. And it turns out that, so we're looking in the shortwave infrared. So we're just looking at light. And so anything that bounces off the ground, the idea is to be able to see that. So it was a breakthrough technology in the sense, I mean, it's been I guess from the 1900s, that's what the Fabry-Perot sensor is. But the way you put it, the way you make it, and to be able to get it through the whole column of the atmosphere, that's what makes it very remarkable and proprietary in that sense, right? But one of the things that happened is that the driver was the carbon market, the CO2. And so this is 2011 when we decided to do this. And I mean, it takes time to build a sensor. It takes time to get a satellite manufacturer, and it takes time to get an Uber to space, right? And imagine 2016 was the first time that it was launched. And so we didn't have SpaceX at the time, so it wasn't that easy. So the reason for this is that we decided in 2016, the company decided to launch this satellite with CO2 and gratefully with methane capabilities. So we learned that measuring CO2 with the type of sensor combined with methane, it wasn't as a good idea as we thought, right? But the way we did it in the sense is that, okay, well, we know that trying to detect CO2, it requires a different way of tuning the sensor. So let's just focus on the part of methane. And luckily we did that because at the time, 2016, methane was part of the conversation just because of what it's called the global warming potential. But the focus was on CO2 all the time, CO2, CO2. As a matter of fact, if you go and talk to an LNG facility, they continue to kind of be their focus is CO2. Nowadays, besides LNGs, the oil and gas are pretty much focused on methane, and you can hear in the regulations and in the U.S. that it's being proposed, the world, the methane pledges, and all of that. But in 2016, we didn't have that, so it took a little bit of, I guess, vision and as well as luck to be able to get it to that point. So the whole point is that we were aiming to have a sensor with these two gases, and it didn't work. So we had to pivot from that, and luckily we did.
That's a fantastic pivot, which is paying off. One of the things we hear a lot of in the startup world is the proverbial valley of death. And, it's the time really before a company is profitable, and obviously it takes a lot of cash to get through the valley of death. Zafar, maybe any thoughts around navigating the valley of death?
Sure. Don't launch during COVID. I think that would help. Funny enough, that's kind of what we did. But I think, again, understanding that you have commercial viability and how to demonstrate commercial viability is what's going to help you navigate your way through this valley of death. I mean, especially in times where either managing through COVID or post-COVID, the ability to know, who your customers really are, being able to communicate that as you're trying to, raise additional funds to kind of move your company to the next stage, specifically where we were at that time. Know your customers very well. What are their value drivers in order to communicate that to them, and if able, and I think what we're fortunate enough to be in this community here in the Texas Medical Center, where you can trial and collect kind of real world evidence while you're building your business and adoption simultaneously can help kind of demonstrate to potential investors as you're kind of getting to that next ramp of funding to push you through. We're still in there. I mean, we're an early stage commercial company. We luckily closed our round not this past summer, the summer before, and now we're actually operating off of that. But still, I mean, I think one of the things that has kind of been our true north is that we have very specific OKRs that again reiterate on commercial viability. Profitability will come, but if you can show that you can actually, have predictable, repeatable results across a broad set of customers, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to go wide, but just demonstrating depth is going to be key. So anyway, that's what we've been doing, especially in commercialization in the medical space. It's hard, but again, the ability to demonstrate viability is and being creative about it now, especially in this environment where the regulatory and the reimbursement environment may not be as easy as one may have thought maybe 10 to 15 years ago. It's difficult. I mean, that's the bottom line. So.
It's interesting when you look at it. You talk about investment. Obviously one of the ways of investing is through venture capital. And really, now being on the venture capital side, it's interesting. It's a little bit of a dance that we play. We're obviously interviewing and finding the best places to invest our capital, but at the same time, you want to be partnered with the right venture capital firms because not all capital is created equally. Peter, do you want to comment a little bit around that? What do you look for when you're raising a round and you're looking to attract investors?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand there's lots of different types of investors, and every investor will tell you that they are value add. Okay, what does that mean, right? And it can mean a lot of different things. There are certain investors who are incredibly knowledgeable as it relates to a specific industry, and that can be very helpful in certain cases. It can be in other situations where that investor may have a wonderful network of executives that they can bring to bear to help you build your team out. That can be exceptionally valuable. It's possible that an individual partner has done your job, has been the CEO of a company in a similar stage and scale, and so they've got a whole bunch of scar tissue that they can share with you, so you don't have to learn all the same mistakes or you can learn from their mistakes versus having to learn them on your own. And then there's also, frankly, these sort of rock star investors out there that if you get money from them, it opens up a whole bunch of different opportunities. And those are names like Sequoia and Andreessen and otherwise who carry a certain degree of pedigree that will open up a different set of doors. And what you have to understand is every time that you're moving, you're working in a relationship with a venture capitalist, it's a marriage. And it's a serious commitment, and it's something that is a successful marriage is built on trust and respect and communication, and you have to have that with your venture capitalists. I think we're seeing some examples maybe recently with SBF and FTX where there wasn't great disclosure, wasn't great understanding of what the business was really doing, and you have some very, very upset investors. And unfortunately, that does happen. So the more that you can build a strong relationship with the people that are going to, that you think are going to help you, the more likely you are to be successful. No one's going to guarantee success, but you have a much higher likelihood of a productive relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. We've talked about the technology. We talked about finance. The other piece is really around creating the right corporate culture, the culture within your organizations. And we hear a lot about passion and purpose. Maybe, Angel, can you tell us a little bit about passion and purpose and creating the right corporate and culture at GHG SAT?
Oh, wow, yes, absolutely. So imagine, our group, in a way, kind of grew during COVID, essentially. Mm-hmm. So everybody is in their house and trying to do recruiting. And so we have a very diverse group of employees or coworkers in that sense, right? So we have kind of the young guys, very young guys, 18-year-olds, because we also have people that, are still studying and they want to do some kind of work on the side. And so that, being able to get to that people in a way, in a meaningful way that they can actually contribute to the company, not only to learn the cool factor of satellites, but the most important thing for us is the vision that the company has in terms of mitigating the methane emissions in this case, right? In this case, it's more along the greenhouse gas as a whole, but right now the mission is the methane. So we found that particular message, that simple sentence, that simple vision, ended up getting in a very long, in all the latitudes in terms of generations here. So we have, like I mentioned, employees that are on the analytics group, very good with computers, but sometimes they may be a little bit not fully aware of what's going on this social scheme or on the environmental scheme. But once you start giving those particular missions, they immediately engage and start actually learning. And so that part, when they gain that, bring that to the table, everything opens, right? And then you have and then you have people putting more time that they require to just because they want to get it done. One of the things that was very, like I tell you, one of the most recent events, very unfortunate for the emissions, but one of the most recent projects that we're working on is to get emissions off of what we call offshore sites. And so what happens with water is that water will tend to basically not reflect the light, right? So we'll absorb it or we'll just dissipate it. And that dissipation that you get, it's called basically like a sheen, like glint it's called, right? So what happened in this explosion that happened in this pipeline in Europe that was actually over water, that event, we were able to see it because we were developing this technique. But in terms of being able to convey this message to the people, right? When the people, the workers there, we were actually, the operations team, the science team, were working diligently at all the levels because we wanted to get a reading of all of that. And that particular event and that particular effort ended up leading up to finding and detecting 79,000 kilograms per hour of an emission. This is tremendous emission, right? The largest that we have detected. But all of that was because there was this extreme motivation from the team to be able to find this particular leak. So it opens a lot of doors, and it basically, essentially, it opens, it's the next frontier for us internally, right? Like, okay, now we were able to get to this point. And so, and that was due to motivation, pretty much. So, because we wanted to find that. So it's a very strong part that we have in our culture.
The passion creates that discretionary effort that they give. I'm conscious of the time here. We've got 2 minutes and 33 seconds. Maybe you want to open it up. Maybe if there's any questions at all from the audience at all. We've got a very esteemed panel here, and I know they're chomping at the bit to address any questions. We got a question right at the back there. I'm not sure how we can get a mic to you, but maybe if you shout loud enough, we may be able to hear you.
Regarding the satellites, what kind of resolution are you getting in? What kind of resolution are you getting on your satellites, and are you able to penetrate clouds?
Okay, so resolution. So spatial resolution, we're looking at 25 meters. So that's a pixel, so 82 feet, right? So that's the pixel size in terms of, now in terms, one important thing is what we call the detection threshold. So right now, the detection threshold for satellite, which we call the nominal, is 100 kilograms per hour. So that translates in around 5 MCF per hour. And so that's pretty much in those detection threshold. Now, clouds is the enemy are the enemies of any type of sensor that requires light. So what happens is if the cloud coverage is, let's say 75% or greater in my field of view, it will not allow for the light to bounce and get it to the sensor. So clouds, unless the sensors are designed to measure clouds, that's how you use it for. So no, we're not able to see through clouds.
Great question. Maybe another question.
I'll leave this open to choose who wants to answer. But I was thinking for early startups, what advice would you give to build a culture of innovation? Things that you might have done early on, or things that you wish you'd done earlier that really set the foundation for building an innovative organization?
Who'd like to take that one first? Okay, Peter.
The more that you can have people focused on the same goal, the more successful you will be. I think the thing that one of our executives has said to me many times is the German, weniger aber besser, like less but better. And the more that you're just continuing to focus, and that everybody understands the direction you're going, the more likely you are to win. It's when you get a diffusion of focus and you get people going in different directions with slightly different visions, that's when you end up with a lot more conflict and you end up oftentimes not getting there. Now, that's hard because there is oftentimes this sort of journey through the desert where you think you know where you're going and you don't. And so you're then in a position where you're having to find a new path. But the more that you can do that as a team because you have potentially a greater goal or otherwise that motivates you, the more likely you are to get there.
Yeah, I would echo that while also, providing room. I think that's the key. I think, especially when you have an environment and, for us specifically, we're a very small team. So the idea of remaining innovative, finding creative solutions, as long as the vision is very succinct into what you're trying to deliver, that's the appeal of working in an organization like this. The appeal, why would somebody be crazy enough to join a venture that, may have limited lifespan, depending on high risk in terms of, what's the rate of startups failing? 1 in 5. So, succeeding 1 in 5. So I think to your point, definitely have a focused vision that they could, again, be their North Star on execution, but giving the freedom for the folks that, as a startup leader, the room to identify how to get there. Because I think what does stall us out is you have micromanagement that you don't want to bring in from your past, your past experiences impacting the ability to innovate. Because we're, certainly I don't have all the answers. I'm sure a lot of folks don't have the answers, but I think in creating an environment where you can question and you can have the ability to find solutions that otherwise wouldn't be found. Otherwise, this wouldn't be, we wouldn't be here. We're creating something that has never been done before, and we're trying to have that as be our impact. So I do contend that as I kind of move from from a mid-cap, large-cap kind of background to startup, that's what I had to struggle with.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Another question, maybe. No. Is it somebody with a hand at the back? No. I think we're good. So hey, I'd like to thank the panel here. I know this is a lot of fun putting this together. It's great to have the representation across the 3 pillars that Pumps and Pipes represents here in a city that is really now starting to resonate, I would say, from a startup ecosystem perspective. And I know Juliana had to run today. She couldn't stay for the rest of the day because she's headed up to New York to try and to meet with investors to try and attract more investment back into Houston in the energy space. So this is the amount of energy that is energy that is really coming into Houston, and the capital which is coming into Houston, which was not the case 4 or 5 years ago. So it's a really exciting time to be in the innovation business in Houston. So with that, I'd like to thank my panel, and thanks everybody here for participating this afternoon. Thank you.